Not every tragedy announces itself with destruction. Some unfold quietly, measured not by what is lost, but by what no longer feels stable. In Jerusalem, recent events have not erased the city or disrupted daily life in obvious ways. Markets still open, streets remain crowded. Sacred sites continue to draw visitors. Yet beneath this surface, something has shifted. Small seismic movements have been recorded. Ancient structures show signs of strain. Health concerns have emerged and been contained. Moments when history slows, not to end, but to ask whether foundations are being examined or merely assumed. Before we continue, hit like to help Jesus' miracles to this message reach others who need to hear it. Minor seismic movements. Israel lies along the Jordan Rift Valley, one of the most geologically active fault systems in the broader region. This is not speculation or symbolism. It is a documented physical reality. Over the past several years, multiple low-magnitude seismic movements have been officially recorded by both the Israel Geological Survey and the United States Geological Survey. These events are measured, logged, and archived as part of routine monitoring. There are no widespread structural failures, no long sequences of aftershocks, and no lasting interruption to daily life. And yet, their significance does not come from intensity. It comes from frequency and location. Jerusalem is built on layers of history stacked upon layers of geology. When the ground moves here, even slightly, it carries a different weight. The city has learned, over centuries, that stability is not guaranteed by appearance alone. Scripture reflects this awareness with remarkable consistency. In the book of Amos, time is marked not by political milestones, but by the earthquake. It becomes a reference point, a dividing line in memory. Zechariah later recalls the same event generations afterward. Not because it destroyed everything, but because it reshaped how people understood their place on the land. The biblical message is careful and restrained. It does not claim that every tremor signals judgment or disaster. Instead, it presents the earth as an active participant in history. The ground is not merely a stage. It responds. It shifts. It speaks in ways quieter than words. Minor seismic movement, in this context, functions as a reminder rather than a threat. A reminder that Jerusalem has never rested on immovable foundations, that even when structures stand and routines continue, the land beneath them remains dynamic. In Scripture, silence does not mean absence, and stillness does not mean permanence. Even subtle movement carries meaning when it repeats often enough to be noticed. If this is worth to you, consider supporting by liking the video and subscribing so we can move on this channel. Stones that shift with time. Jerusalem's old city and the slopes of the Mount of Olives rest on layers that have been built, rebuilt, and repaired over thousands of years. This alone makes the city extraordinary. It also makes it vulnerable in a very specific way. Official conservation reports from the Israel Antiquities Authority acknowledge several ongoing conditions. Hairline fractures appearing in ancient stone, gradual settling, and slight structural shifts, stress caused by time, geology, and hidden underground cavities. These changes are real. They are documented. And yet, they are not classified as a major disaster. Instead, what is happening is slow change, and that is precisely why many consider it deeply concerning. Slow change is easy to dismiss. It does not interrupt daily life. It does not force immediate action. But history shows that some of the greatest tragedies do not begin with collapse. They begin with neglect of small warnings. When foundations weaken gradually, the danger is not today, but what happens when pressure finally exceeds endurance. Scripture speaks directly to this pattern. The Bible often uses stones and walls as images of testing rather than instant destruction. When foundations strain, Scripture does not urge panic. It urges examination. Jesus himself spoke of houses built on rock versus sand, not to describe architecture, but readiness. Both houses may stand for a long time. The difference only becomes visible when stress arrives. In Jerusalem, stones that quietly shift are not a catastrophe, but they are a reminder. Even the most sacred structures are subject to time. And when ancient foundations are under strain, the concern is not whether something has fallen yet, but whether conditions are being allowed to continue unchecked. Stay with this moment, because what appears slow and quiet here begins to echo in another form in the next unfolding sign: disease concerns. In recent times, Israel has also navigated a series of public health concerns that, while contained, have contributed to a broader sense of fragility. These situations did not spiral into nationwide crisis, nor did they overwhelm daily life. Still, they served as reminders that stability can never be taken for granted. Avian influenza strains detected within animal populations, requiring monitoring and containment. The reappearance of measles in certain communities, prompting renewed public health responses. Environmental detection of poliovirus, identified through surveillance systems without widespread illness. Each of these developments was managed by health authorities, supported by monitoring systems designed precisely for early detection. There was no uncontrolled spread, no systemic failure, and no public collapse. From a technical standpoint, the systems worked, and yet the significance of these events lies not in their severity, but in their timing and recurrence. Public health concerns do not need to escalate into catastrophe to be unsettling. Their power lies in how they quietly expose human vulnerability. They remind societies that even advanced systems depend on balance, cooperation, and attentiveness. When that balance is strained, even briefly, it leaves a mark on collective consciousness. Scripture often frames such moments with restraint. In the Hebrew texts, illness is rarely portrayed as chaos or randomness. It is not described simply as biology or fate. Instead, it appears as a moment of reflection, a pause that draws attention to human limitation, not punishment, not disorder, but vulnerability. Jerusalem has encountered similar seasons many times across its long history. Periods when uncertainty entered quietly, without force, and asked questions rather than issuing threats. The city's endurance has never come from denial or bravado. It has come from awareness that life is fragile, awareness that systems require care, awareness that confidence must be tempered with humility. What makes these health concerns part of a broader tragedy is not what they caused, but what they revealed. They showed how quickly assumptions of control can be tested, and how essential vigilance remains even when everything appears calm. Why this is a worst tragedy. So, why call this the worst tragedy? Because none of these events destroy the city. They unsettle something far more important: the sense of permanence. The ground moves, not violently, but persistently. The stones shift, not dramatically but quietly. Systems continue to function, yet they are reminded of their limits. There is no single moment of collapse to point to, no clear ending, only repetition. Scripture teaches that the most serious warnings rarely arrive with noise or spectacle. They return again and again in restrained forms, allowing time for recognition rather than forcing reaction. When signs repeat, they are not meant to overwhelm. They are meant to awaken. This is why the tragedy feels deeper. It does not demand attention through destruction. It asks for attention through continuity. A city still standing, yet gently shaken. A reminder that endurance is not the same as invulnerability. In biblical language, such moments are not endings but thresholds. And thresholds are dangerous not because they break what stands, but because they test whether what stands is ready for what comes next. Is this the wrath of God? Scripture approaches the idea of divine wrath with great care. It is never portrayed as impulsive, uncontrolled, or chaotic. Biblical wrath is measured, restrained, and purposeful. It unfolds with intention, not emotion, and always within the framework of justice rather than impulse. More often than not, Scripture shows that what comes before judgment is not punishment, but mercy. Time is given to observe, to reflect, and to return. Warnings appear gradually, not to overwhelm, but to invite awareness. The pattern is consistent. Space is created for recognition before consequence. In the prophetic texts, moments of restraint carry as much meaning as moments of action. Silence, repetition, and subtle disturbance often serve as signals long before decisive intervention. This is why Scripture repeatedly calls for watchfulness rather than fear, and discernment rather than panic. If these events were expressions of wrath, Scripture suggests they would look very different. They would be final, unmistakable, and decisive. Instead, what is observed now resembles a season of patience, a pause in which foundations are gently tested rather than torn apart. The more pressing question, then, is not whether wrath has begun, but whether mercy is still being offered. Scripture consistently teaches that the greatest danger is not judgment itself, but ignoring the quiet moments that precede it. Christ will return. The Bible frames the return of Christ not as devastation, but as completion, not as fear, but restoration. From Genesis to Revelation, Scripture presents history as purposeful, moving toward fulfillment rather than collapse. The return of Christ is not described as the unraveling of creation, but as the moment when what is broken is made whole, when what is unfinished reaches its intended end. Throughout Scripture, signs are never introduced to terrify humanity into submission. They are given to awaken awareness. They serve as markers along a road, reminders that time is meaningful and that direction matters. Jesus himself emphasized this distinction. He did not instruct his followers to panic when signs appear. He called them to watch, to remain steady, and to live with discernment. Watchfulness in Scripture is not anxiety, it is attentiveness. In the Gospels, the return of Christ is consistently associated with readiness rather than alarm. Parables speak of lamps kept lit, servants found faithful, and foundations built with care. These images are not about escape or survival, but about alignment. They suggest that the most important preparation is internal, rooted in character, humility, and truth, rather than outward calculation. The New Testament reinforces this theme. Paul writes of Christ's return as a hope that anchors the believer, not a threat that destabilizes. Peter speaks of it as a promise that refines perspective, encouraging lives shaped by integrity and patience. Revelation, often misunderstood as a book of terror, ultimately points toward restoration, the renewal of creation, and the re-establishment of justice. The final image is not chaos, but harmony, not abandonment, but presence. Signs, in this framework, function like echoes. They repeat rather than shout. They appear across time and place, gently pressing the same question into human consciousness. What is truly lasting? When familiar structures feel uncertain, Scripture does not urge fixation on events. It urges reflection on foundations. Christ compared lives to houses not to warn of storms, but to reveal what remains standing when storms pass. The return of Christ, according to Scripture, is not a moment to dread, but a reality meant to recalibrate priorities. It reminds humanity that history is not random, that justice is not forgotten, and that meaning does not dissolve under pressure. It calls attention away from surface stability and toward deeper grounding.